G'day, I'm Owen and you've joined this week's episode of the Pub Test where we are again continuing our Jack the Ripper suspect series, and in this one, by popular vote, we are covering H Holmes, but a cut down version of this bloke's life, so that we're only really focusing in on where he fits into the Jack the Ripper saga. His entire life will be covered in a different video, and that is a bit of a deep dive, so you'll have to bear with us on that one. But who was he and how does he fit into the Jack the Ripper saga? Well, Holmes was born in 1861. His upbringing could be considered fairly stable, though it's said that he had strict religious Methodist parents, but his father was also an alcoholic and probably treated himself and his mother not all that well. But he did get a really good education. Now, we're not deep diving into him, as we've said, so we're just looking at that. He did get qualified in the medical fraternity, so he could call himself Dr. H H Holmes. Now, the thing about H Holmes is we know a lot of detail in his life. Unlike so many other people in this Jack the Ripper series who we have scant little details on, this bloke left a paper trail everywhere he went, so we can pinpoint all the major events in his life. Yet, there was a small gap in this paperwork. And surprisingly, that was in 1888 and 1889. There isn't much known of his whereabouts. So straight away, we would think he must have been in Whitechapel. In fact, it's quite surprising that no one really questioned this back then. Now, he did confess at the end of his life, which not going into all these murders or the murder castle, which is a story for another time, but in his memoir, he confessed to 27 murders. Now, considering all the things he has reported to have done, and a lot of these terrible things which we'll cover in a different video, happened after the Whitechapel murders. So that is of note. So why didn't anyone, when there was a gap of 2 years, where he may not have been in the United States, did no one back then actually think to point the finger at this bloke? And yet this detail didn't come up until recently, until a person by the name of Jeff Mudget wrote a book called Bloodstains. Now, he said that he came into possession of some personal diaries of H H Holmes. And in there, we find the confessions and the way the crimes were committed in Whitechapel. So he now points to say that he was Jack the Ripper. But surely this Jeff Mudget bloke is just making up the story. Because anyone could claim, yeah, I've found some diaries and look what I've got. Except H H Holmes' real name was Mudget. That was the family name. And Jeff Mudget is actually the great-great-grandson of the infamous H H Holmes. Now, Jeff Mudget said that he put in a lot of work to corroborate this. Was there any proof that he could have done it? Now, once again, I must disclaim here, I have not read the book. I have seen some reviews on the book, and it's probably not exactly my style of reading. But it's out there if you want to check it out. You can see what's said in the book. Absolutely knock yourself out. But in doing the research on whether or not this connection could have been there, they found a manifest of a person by the name of H. Holmes travelling back to the United States from England in early 1889, when the crimes had finished. Now, the assertion here is, and there's a couple of theories, so you'll have to sort of settle in on this one to listen to the theories around H H Holmes. But firstly, in the Murder's Castle that we'll discuss in a different video, it's reported that he hunted particularly women for sport. That's how he got his notoriety now as this most infamous serial killer. And so it is suggested, in this instance, he's gone to Whitechapel to practice his crimes. Now, he was medically trained, and many people either believed the person was medically trained or at least knew their way around some knives. And it is suggested that H Holmes definitely did that, considering what he's alleged to have done later on. Also, that he was calculating. These weren't crimes, these Whitechapel crimes weren't ones of someone just running up and hacking and slashing, but he was able to disable the victims first, then lay them out, and then do the rest of the work. And that's why it's said that no one could ever hear or see the person who was doing this, because they were so careful in what they were doing. And the way H Holmes is portrayed, that really does seem to fit this description. And there's another theory here, that maybe he wasn't working alone. And there is a general consensus that perhaps Jack the Ripper didn't work solitary. It's said that he had this business partner, Peitzel. I think that's how it's pronounced. I'll double check that later. But it's suggested that they worked together over in England. Basically, H Holmes had already committed quite a lot of crimes, and he wanted to bring his buddy along, teach him the ropes a little bit, and also solidify this business arrangement that they had by committing some atrocities. And then it's unlikely that Peitzel would basically turn his mate in, because, well, he's now complicit in some horrendous crimes. Now, all of this makes a great deal of sense, without doubt. And even getting the diaries from a descendant of this guy, well, that's fairly compelling evidence. But let's think about it just a little bit more in detail. So was there any proof that Holmes was in England? Well, we look at that manifest. H. Holmes travelled back the United States from England. I just did a quick search. So if you look at Ancestry.com or any of those, you roughly find 85,000 records for the last name Holmes. Yet you find 444 records for the last name Mudget. Now that is important when we look at the history of H. Holmes, because he was a con man. And the name Mudget was very rare, so he had to take on a name that was way more common. And Holmes was predominantly in the United States at the time. Most of the Holmes families lived there. So it's not that unlikely that you are going to find a H. Holmes on some manifest. What I find really surprising is that there's no record of one going over there in the first place. I thought you would have found quite a few of them. But to me, that was trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. We think, okay, can we find evidence he went there? Well, let's find something in a manifest. Now, people point to the MO and say it was very similar method of operation that the Ripper did to what H. Holmes did. Except there is a major difference, as you'll see in the next video. See, Holmes didn't do any of his crimes just for the sake of it. He did it to get some advantage or some money or whatever that could have been. There was no gain for him in any of the Whitechapel crimes at all. And even in Jeff's Mudget own book, it stated at the top, based on true events. So he's not saying this is an accurate, detailed description, but he's loosely based the story around what he thought would have happened. There's claims that the ghost of H Holmes was talking to him, even trying to convince him to start murdering people as well. So in my opinion, it is drawing a long bow that H Holmes could have been the Ripper. There's no definitive proof he was ever in England. In fact, I suggest that there's proof that he never did go to England. I would go back to saying that Triple H, Hunter Hearst Helmsley, the professional wrestler, could more likely be Jack the Ripper because he's officially gone to England quite a few times and had his passport stamped. And again, if you think that could be viable, I'll run a video on him. But as always, if you have more information or you disagree or you do agree, put that down in comments. I try to answer as many as possible. I really do appreciate you watching. Do the usuals. Like, subscribe. I'm Owen, and we will see you on the next edition of The Pub Test.